Yo, what is up guys? Delboy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash that like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. So a quick preview and prediction for Saul Canelo Alvarez versus Callum Smith. This fight goes down on the 19th of December, and Callum Smith's WBA super middleweight title is going to be on the line. You know, on paper this fight is pretty decent. Callum Smith obviously is unbeaten, he's a world champion, and of course he's a much bigger man. But there are a few circumstances surrounding this fight that do somewhat dampen my excitement for it. I've actually made a previous video on that on my channel if you want to check that out. I think it's titled Callum Smith versus Canelo Alvarez. Are you excited for this fight? But like I said, on paper, it's a pretty solid fight, but I do have a couple of concerns going in. But we're not going to talk about that too much in this video. Let's briefly get into the tail of the tape. We shall start with the resounding favourite, Canelo Alvarez. Canelo has a record of 53 wins, 1 defeat, 2 draws. 36 of those 53 wins coming by way of knockout. Callum Smith, on the other hand, has a record of 27-0, 19 of his 27 wins coming by way of knockout. Canelo Alvarez is listed as 5'8", with a 70.5-inch reach, whereas Callum Smith is listed as 6'3", with a 78-inch reach. So Callum Smith is a much bigger guy, and that's where his chances lie in this fight. Callum Smith has a considerable 7.5-inch reach advantage, and also he's got a 7-inch height advantage. Those stats are kind of staggering when you look at it like that. So obviously Callum Smith needs to utilise those the best he can in this fight. Ultimately, I think the size of Callum Smith really will be his only hope in this one. But yeah, both fighters are orthodox. Canelo Alvarez is 30 years old and Callum Smith is also 30 years old. So that is the brief tale of the tape. Where do we start with this one? Let's start with Callum Smith. What does he need to do to win this fight? Well, obviously, like I was mentioning earlier, Callum Smith is the much bigger, longer, taller, and I would say stronger guy in there. Naturally a much bigger man than Canelo Alvarez, and he really needs to utilise those advantages going into this fight. The first thing I want to see from Callum Smith in this fight is more of a consistent jab. Callum Smith, in my opinion, for such a tall, long guy, kind of gets a little bit lazy with his jab. For my money, it's not varied enough, the jab, and the main problem is he's not consistent enough with it. He doesn't throw it enough, in my opinion, for such a tall guy, and he needs to adjust that going into this Canelo fight. If you look at Canelo's fight with Sergey Kovalev, Kovalev was arguably winning that fight before the knockout, and let's be honest, in that fight Sergey Kovalev really wasn't doing anything. He was throwing a weak jab, trying to keep range, trying to keep Canelo off of him, and just by doing that, by utilising that jab and length advantage, he was winning a lot of rounds. So in this fight against the much smaller man, Callum needs to get that jab going. He needs to get that jab pumping and use it on a consistent basis. But also, not only use that jab on a consistent basis, he needs to vary what type of jab he throws, throw it to the head, throw it to the body, use a thudding jab, a quick jab, a pouring jab. Callum Smith can't afford to give Canelo too many tells in this fight. The problem with Callum Smith with his jab and with his fight style in general is kind of the same thing every single fight, and against someone like Canelo Alvarez, after a couple of rounds, he's going to read what Callum Smith is doing and then obviously neutralise him. So the jab needs to be a lot more varied in this fight, and it needs to be thrown a lot more consistently than what we're used to seeing with Callum Smith. The same old jab over and over, a hard jab to the head. Eventually Canelo's going to get used to that. He's going to slip the jab, then he's going to work on the inside, work that body, etc. So the jab in this fight is very important from Callum, but it certainly needs to be a lot more educated than we are used to seeing. And of course, Callum Smith, another thing with Canelo, to me, a lot of his opponents show far too much respect. Sergey Kovalev, for prime example. Danny Jacobs, another guy who never really forced the pace. Callum Smith can't afford to be boxing. He also needs to mix it up in this fight. Again, utilise that superior size and maybe even superior punching power. He needs to put Canelo in his place in this fight, catch him with something big, lean on him, make it a rough, tough affair, tire him out. Canelo's the much smaller man in there against Callum Smith. Obviously, Canelo's going to want to work up close against Callum, and if that happens, Callum needs to neutralise that. Yeah, you could trade with Canelo on the inside, but Callum's going to get pieced up. You know, it might be ugly, it may be ungainly and horrible to watch, but Callum needs to tie up Canelo, similar to how Kell Brook tied up Sean Porter, for example. Tie up Canelo, neutralise him, try to barge him around the ring, really, really rest your weight on him. Tire this guy out. Canelo Alvarez doesn't have the greatest stamina in the world. It's certainly improved, but this is a guy, when you watch him fight, he does tend to take a lot of breaks in there, and he likes to fight at his own comfort level and his own rhythm. I want to see somebody really force him out of that rhythm, force him out of his comfort zone, and Callum Smith certainly has got the size and strength to do that, in my opinion. Can Canelo really outstrength Callum Smith in the clinch? I'd be very surprised, unless Callum Smith is depleted, of course. But that's another thing for Callum Smith, in my opinion. A key to victory is obviously to make that size advantage count and make Canelo work really hard. Make him feel your weight, make him feel your physicality. I'm sure that Callum Smith must be the stronger man in there, certainly the heavier man, so try to make that count in some regards. You know, the clinch can be very effective for a bigger man when you're fighting someone like Canelo. You can really sap your opponent's energy without really throwing a punch. So that's one area where I would be looking at, you know, trying to exploit Canelo's questionable stamina, or at least trying to ask the question of Canelo's stamina. So yeah, the size of Callum Smith, he needs to make it work for himself. And yeah, Callum just needs to be a lot more active in this fight, use his feet a little bit more, don't invite Canelo onto the inside with offering no resistance, you know, try and shut Canelo out with a jab, move your legs. Callum can move relatively well. He does have kind of slow feet, but when you've got such a big reach advantage over a smaller opponent, who, let's be honest, Canelo himself hasn't got the quickest feet, you know, Callum needs to try and keep this on the outside as much as possible, in my opinion. And obviously try to win the early rounds and get a foothold in this fight. Try to, you know, make Canelo panic a little bit. Try to make him be a bit more gung-ho, a bit more aggressive. And then obviously from there, you try to time him coming in. Callum Smith does have a nice counter right hand, but Callum Smith's best punch, or one of his best punches, is his counter left hook. A really effective counter left hook. He's knocked out quite a few opponents with that shot. So try to win the early rounds, of course, and as Canelo gets a little bit more desperate, a little bit more aggressive, then try to mix that left hook in there as Canelo enters mid-range. So Callum needs to basically be Callum, but, you know, add that physicality, you know, improve on that jab, be more consistent with it, and work from there, basically. Callum's got the physical attributes to trouble Canelo, in my opinion. He really does. But there are a few concerns I have going into it in regards to Callum. I think I'll get into that at the end of the video. But those, to me, are the keys to victory for Callum Smith, basically. As for Canelo, you know, Canelo, he is a extremely good boxer, as we know. Defensively very sound, good counter puncher, great head movement. Canelo Alvarez basically is just an all-round really talented fighter. You know, doesn't have many glaring weaknesses, in my opinion. And yeah, you know, he's fighting the taller, longer man, a man who is relatively, I wouldn't say stationary, but relatively slow, kind of straight up and down, throws straight punches. You know, Canelo needs to obviously, his task is to get on the inside, and minimise that reach advantage for Callum Smith. So the key for Canelo obviously is taking away the jab of Callum. He can do that by head movement, you know, feinting the jab, slipping, coming in, working the body. Essentially, you know, Canelo's main task here is getting on the inside. If he gets on the inside, you know, providing Callum doesn't do what I say he should do and clinch, you know, Canelo's going to have free reign at the body of Callum Smith. You know, there's a lot of body to aim at with Callum. And, you know, Callum in the past has shown I wouldn't say an unwillingness, but an inability to fight on the inside. We saw that against John Ryder. When John Ryder got to the inside, he closed the distance with his quick feet, you know, jabbed his way in. Once John Ryder was on the inside, he basically had a free reign to work on the inside. Callum really wasn't coming back with too much on the inside. Yeah, the odd uppercut here and there, but Callum's not a great inside fighter, so whenever Canelo is on the inside, he needs to make those moments count, work the body, and try and chop down the much taller, longer man. The bodywork of Canelo in this fight is going to be key. Like I said, obviously because there's a lot of body to aim at, but also Callum Smith is a big 168 pounder. He obviously struggles to make weight in some regard. It can't be easy. So how strong is Callum Smith at 168? I'm not entirely sure what happens when you work that body. Maybe he struggles due to the weight cut. I felt John Ryder was having a lot of success to the body against Callum, and in my opinion, that certainly showed down the stretch in that fight. It was John Ryder who was the stronger, fresher man going into the championship rounds in that fight. So yeah, the bodywork of Canelo is going to be key in this fight, and of course, you know, Canelo is a brilliant body puncher. Great left hook to the body, jab to the body, straight right to the body. Canelo's a really varied body puncher, and he'll need to be doing that against Callum. Essentially, with Canelo, I think he needs to be careful in the first 2-3 rounds while Callum Smith is still fresh, while he's still got power. You know, assess the situation. You know, try not to take too much. Get in when you can, work the body, get out. And from there, just slowly start chopping Callum down. And after a sustained body attack, then come up through the middle with uppercuts to the head, hooks to the head, and try and chop him down that way. You know, Canelo's got the skill set to really go to town on Callum on the inside. To me, Canelo's only real problem is getting there. If he gets there without a problem, I think this fight's a wrap. Ultimately, it's down to Callum to really keep this on the outside and utilise his range. I'm not sure how effectively Canelo's going to box with Callum on the outside. He's so much smaller, he's got so much less reach. I'm not sure how effective he's going to be on the outside. So yeah, Canelo's main task is obviously getting on the inside. I would like to see Canelo, you know, quicken up his feet a little bit, show a better ability of cutting off a ring. Canelo has certainly improved his ability to cut off a ring, but again, I want to see more improvements. I want to see more head feints, draw the lead, get underneath, quick step in, jab your way in maybe. You know, when you look at John Ryder, he was really effective at drawing the lead, slipping, dropping low, firing like an up jab, and then he would quickly move inside. And, you know, if Canelo can replicate that, which I'm sure he can do, he should easily get on the inside. And from there, you would imagine Canelo's going to go to town unless Callum Smith, you know, doesn't hold him to death. But again, it's in Texas, so is Callum Smith going to get away with those sort of tactics? We shall see. But ultimately, my pick in this fight is Canelo Alvarez on points. I don't think Canelo's going to stop Callum Smith. I think Callum is just too big, too strong. I would be surprised if Canelo stops Callum Smith, to be honest. If he does, it's going to be by accumulation. He's not going to go in there and one-bang Callum Smith. I just don't see it happening. If it does happen, it'll be a late stoppage by accumulation. But I think the safe bet here is Canelo Alvarez on points. Even if it's a close fight where people think Callum wins, Canelo's going to get it on the cards. I just see Canelo Alvarez being the safe bet here on points by unanimous decision. That's what I'm going with in this fight. And, you know, there are other reasons I'm kind of down on Callum going into this fight. Obviously, the weight cut is one. And the 4-week training camp is another factor. You know, ultimately 4 weeks is not really a long time to prepare for Canelo Alvarez. And bear in mind, some of that time is going to be spent travelling to America for this fight. So Callum Smith doesn't even really have 4 weeks in this one. It's all well and good people saying a fighter should stay in shape for any fight. I do agree with that statement, but also when you have a mega fight like this, you need to tailor your sparring, your game plan, your training camp to that particular opponent. And 4 weeks, in my opinion, for a fight at this level just isn't enough. And I think that's going to be key going into this fight. And one more aspect in which I'm kind of down on Callum Smith is the John Ryder fight. You know, against a much smaller man, an inside fighter. Look at how Callum struggled in that fight. He really couldn't keep John Ryder at bay. I can't see him keeping Canelo at bay, to be quite honest. I really can't. But there we go. I've got Canelo Alvarez on points over Callum Smith. What about you guys? Share your thoughts below. Peace.